Hey guys, coming at you live with a special podcast for today, talking about the history of Halloween. So if you listened to yesterday's podcast, you would have heard me say that I love Halloween. Halloween is my favorite season, and yes, I do call it a season because I do believe that Halloween is celebrated all throughout October. You can watch horror movies, listen to Halloween music, and don't even argue me, there is Halloween music out there. And most importantly, decorating houses. I think that is so beautiful, and I can't wait to be able to decorate my own. But today we're going to talk about the history of Halloween. So originally, Halloween wasn't even called Halloween. So it began in ancient Celtic, and originally it was a festival called Samhain. And basically what they would do is that they believed that dressing up in costumes and going around a bonfire will prevent spirits from destroying their crops and things like that. So it happened at the end of the summer harvest, and it was just before the cold winters came in. So for them, this was a time associated with death, and they believed that on the night before their new year, that the boundary between the living world and the dead became blurred, and that the spirits were most active, which is something that is still believed to this day, that on Halloween, the line between the spirit world and our world becomes more faded and more ghosts are allowed to pass through. So when they celebrated, it was believed that the ghosts of the dead had returned. So they had believed that these ghosts were causing trouble and damaging the crops. But they didn't think that the ghosts were only bad. They also thought that it helped their druids, which were their priests, make predictions of the future and what would happen, dealing with like natural disasters or how bad the winters were going to be. So the druids were the ones who had these huge sacred bonfires where the people would gather and they would burn crops and make animal sacrifices to their deities in order to make it so that they were protected and they were safe. So during these celebrations, they usually wore costumes and they wanted to ward off any bad spirits. So when the celebration was over, they relit their home fires, which were extinguished as only the bonfire fire was supposed to be going. And then we jump forward to about 43 AD, where the Roman Empire has conquered a majority of Celtic territory. And this is where we start seeing a mix of Celtic traditions and Celtic and some would say pagan traditions start mixing in with like a lot of Christianity and a lot of Catholic practices. So Romans traditionally celebrated the passing of the dead, and eventually it got changed into the practice of bobbing for apples that we know today. So what would happen is Rome had a coinciding holiday called All Saints' Day, which would, originally it was said to be about May 13th, but once the implication of Samhain came in, it became November 1st, where it was believed that after the dispelling of all the evil spirits, then all the saint spirits would be left. So, like I said, this was when the influence of Christianity had spread to the Celtic lands, and they started to blend and mix rituals together. So, All Souls' Day, or All Saints' Day, was celebrated after what would be known as All Hallows' Eve. So, All Hallows' Eve was still celebrated with bonfires, but they started having parades and would dress up in costumes such as saints, angels, and devils. And what would happen is, years later, it became more known as All Hallows' Eve, and then eventually become known as Halloween as we know it today. So then we jump to when Halloween comes to America. So the celebration of Halloween was originally very, very limited in colonial New England. And this is because the Protestants believed that Halloween was a day of demons and dark spirits. So they didn't really want that and didn't want to welcome it in. And what ended up happening is that they would have people who disregarded it would have more of a mischief night where they would come in and like cause commotions and like have really grand parties. And then in the second half of the 19th century, America was flooded with new immigrants, and these immigrants were fleeing Irish. So the Irish brought over more of their tradition. So then in the Americas, they started beginning dressing up, and they started going house to house to ask for food or money, which this is what started the whole trick-or-treat that we know today, where little kids would go house to house and ask for candy. So what would happen back then is that if they didn't get food or money, then a trick would be played. So then we jump forward a bit, and we go to the late 1800s, where there was a move to mold Halloween into a holiday that cared more about community and getting together, and became more like about ghosts and pranks and witchcraft. So at the turn of the century, Halloween parties for both children and adults became the common way to celebrate the day. These parties focused on games, food, and mainly really festive costumes. So parents were mostly engaged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything frightening or grotesque out of Halloween celebrations because they wanted to make it more community efforts. And eventually, Halloween lost most of its superstitious and religious overtones. But that isn't to say that some people don't still believe in those superstitious beliefs. I, for one, I do believe that on October 31st, that the border between the spirit world and our world is thinned. And I also do believe that there is something special about Halloween, the day in itself. To me, I am drawn to Halloween, and I think it's a time where you get to not only like express yourself in a way you don't the rest of the year, but you also get to explore different things. And I feel that Halloween itself is its own culture. Like horror and Halloween are the perfect mix together, and I feel it should be that way. And especially with the origins of it is having a spiritual thing, I don't think that it should be separated as it is. So that's going to be it for today's podcast. I hope you learned something new. Have a good day.